You want to talk WandaVision for a little bit?
Sure.
My wife even said, "It's like, well, if you're going to be doing this for Wizard, you should probably rewatch them all." I think that's her way of saying she wants to rewatch them all, which is not characteristic of her. She's not usually one to rewatch a show, especially when it's been seen within the last year.
And there's all those little hidey little triggers and hints and stuff.
Yes.
I can watch it again and again and again.
Initially, I saw at the beginning, I saw a few people complain about, it's like, why don't they dump it all at once? And there are some shows that is the way to watch them. There are some shows that an entire season in one night is like one really long movie. And some shows it works. Some shows you need to think about in between, like Westworld. Say we loved analyzing it, especially season 1. We loved analyzing it, discussing it in between. You don't get the same kind of water cooler conversation with the ones that dump all at once. Everybody, it's, okay, where are you in the show? Okay, I want you to catch up so we can talk about it. As opposed to, okay, you either watched it the other night or you didn't. I'm going to talk to the people who did watch it the other night. And there's all these levels of mystery. There is, of course, the what's going on, but what's going on inside her head? What's going on with these different characters? I've noticed a number of people comparing it to the Kübler-Ross stages of grief. There was some Reddit conversation. There have been a number of articles, and I haven't read them too in depth because I want to think about it myself first. And I thought, well, let's bring this up with you guys. Because either one of you want to tell our audience basically what the if you can't remember the list in order, what's the concept of the Kübler-Ross stages of grief? What's that,
Aaron?
It's a test question.
Remember them in order. Oh my gosh,
Don't worry about the order.
So the idea is that people who are faced with their own impending mortality or with the loss of somebody else that they love, and if memory serves, it was originally about your own impending mortality, like people who are given a terminal diagnosis. And so you go through these stages, which includes things like denial, like it's not true, bargaining, like, dear God, just whatever I need to do, I'll be a good person, I'll, rescue puppies, whatever that is. Anger.
Depression.
Is the second one. And then sadness.
Or depression, as Scott called it.
Depression. Yeah. And then acceptance is the last one now.
You got them all.
Yeah.
Piecemeal, but you got them all. 2 and 3 were the ones I always had trouble remembering what the order had been. Is it anger then bargaining, or bargaining you get angry when the bargain doesn't work? Yeah, psychiatrist Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, working with terminally ill patients, had noticed these patterns. She said this was not universal, that not everybody goes through them in order. Not everybody goes through all of them. Some people have some other reactions. When she was terminally ill herself, she said she wished she had fit in a 6th one, as opposed to being just angry about your situation, but angry at God and the universe itself.
Metaphysical anger.
Yeah, she was particularly bitter during her own terminal diagnosis. There is this common pattern. Not everybody has them all. She said herself this is not so universal as so many people make it out to be. My favorite example of it was on The Simpsons, when Homer mistakenly got a diagnosis. The doctor described all these stages, and then Homer went through all of them in about 20 seconds.
Yeah, I'll have to go back and watch. When I go back and watch the series again, I'll look for these. I mean, in my memory, I can look back and say, oh yeah, she was really mad when she came out of her own border and confronted the other people in the other world. And okay, what episode was that? Was that 2 or 3, right? And these things were definitely in there.
Well, let's start with that. Well, the first one was denial. Has Wanda been in denial?
I think they're showing that, that she wasn't fully conscious of everything that she had put together in order to have this happy sitcom lifestyle.
The fact that it was conscious, you only have to deny it when you're confronted about it consciously, right? So all the work had been done to establish this unconscious world. So a little implicit denial, I guess. But for me, the most robust that came out was the anger when she just ripped through her own barrier and said, get out of here, I'm taking care of myself.
What I see, the people who are bringing up this model, they see that there's a lot of denial going on in the first 2 or 3 episodes, although that's made more explicit to viewers with the recaps, like the previously on episode when they're showing these things going on. The anger starts when Monica makes the mistake of referring to Ultron. She gets angry at her, angry at Vision, angry at Sword. She's just mad all over the place. And then we get one episode that she's depressed beginning to end.
The one where she's it's the Modern Family episode where she's kind of in the pajamas the whole time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way.
Between was bargaining. In between anger and acceptance, anger and depression is the bargaining. Yes, I had to think through that. Like I said, I always get the 2 and the 3 mixed up because they're not these universal things. Right. Bargaining, she kind of makes a bargain with reality itself. She has made a bargain with reality. They argue that she's kind of bargaining with Sword, tell him stay out of my yard.
I will limit my life as long as I can, have it in this particular. I'll even bargain away my goodness, my status as a hero. In that last one, when she was like, he's trying to make you into the villain, and you're like, well, maybe I am one. I could see it. I could see work for it.
Yeah, exactly. There's a bunch of, and these bargaining things, they do come in later in the series rather than earlier. So from a stage-wise perspective, they're placed in the right way.
And Agnes, or those of us who knew the comics, it's been obvious all along, well, she'd better be Agatha Harkness with a name like that. Agatha Harkness. Which was a really nice touch. It lets the people who know that go, oh, I had this thing and I knew all along. Yeah, but there's so much other stuff going on. We're arguing about who the other big bad is, and now we're heading into the finale, not 100% certain if there is another big bad. It seems silly to waste the chance to have somebody else involved, but the core of that story, they've got a whole lot of stuff going on in the finale. We got
Vision coming back as a white guy. I mean, I think that's amazing. I got to tell you, the level of storytelling here is just off the hook. And if this is the way they usher in the new MCU phase, I think we're going to be able to look back at the last 10 plus years of Disney storytelling in the MCU and really see them, I would say, being culturally progressive. I mean, the first, what is Iron Man but a rich white privileged guy who's got himself encased in steel, so he doesn't have to experience the world's suffering. He makes his money, and what happens to him? He experiences the consequences of his own hedonism, and he suddenly, in the end, gives himself for others. Basically, that's the end of the hedonistic white man. And I just think, I just saw that vision at the end, and I thought, oh, no way, that is just so cool. And now, instead of a man wrapping himself in steel and eventually becoming human, now you have a system that's all steel, or whatever you want to call it, teaching all of us how to be more human. So I don't know if they intended it, but I just love it.
Did you read the West Coast Avengers comics that had the White Vision in it?
No.
In the comics, Vision's been abducted. Over in Avengers, he had briefly tried to take over the world's defense systems. Today, it would be that he was taking over the internet.
Right.
And so this coalition of almost every country of the world ganged up to kidnap the Vision and dismantle him and study him. So even the way the particular pieces are laid out in that lab is very reminiscent of what went on in John Byrne's story about the Vision getting dismantled. When he's put back together, he's kind of like, you take him apart, you put him back together, but something's not quite right. And he didn't have his emotions. He was this white-bodied Vision with no emotions. And things never recovered, never were the same between him and Wanda again. Even when he got emotions later on, he had somebody else's brainwaves. And while it looks like, well, okay, you've got this Vision body. You've got his body put back together. Maybe that's got the computer files that have the actual memories, even if he doesn't have the emotions. But then there's Wanda's magic version of Vision, whatever he is,
Yeah.
he has his own independent reality. Maybe she accidentally grabbed his soul. People going, androids don't have souls. In Marvel Comics, androids have souls, or otherwise they're just robots. And yeah, there are fans going, well, maybe these will be merged and we'll have a whole Vision again. That doesn't get us to acceptance of the death. That doesn't get us to acceptance of the loss. So
it depends on what they're gonna do with it. I mean, one of the things I love about what they're doing with this story is so I think telling a story about the fact that we all live in Wanda bubbles, right? And we don't think we do. And then we look at someone like Wanda, oh, she's traumatized. And yeah, she definitely buried her trauma in this border and stuff. And okay, but what we don't tend to realize is how much we create our own Wanda bubbles every day. We live in our own memories. And it's only when we live in a privileged context that affords our unconscious memories to match with how the world works every day that we just feel like, well, of course, this is who I am. And of course, this is how things should be. But when people aren't in the privileged group, then their Wanda bubbles, which they have to create, are also in that tension of what the normative privilege bubble is and what theirs is. And if Disney can get us to the point to giving us that kind of a pragmatic view on what it means to be someone instead of a right or wrong view, I will be impressed. I have to say, they did really good work, I think, and creating a pluralistic hero universe and up through Endgame. And basically everybody came together to save the world. And now what do? What do we do from there? And we realized, well, we all live in Wanda bubbles, and maybe we should create a culture that appreciates everybody's Wanda bubbles.
But boy, do we get angry when somebody challenges our Wanda bubble.
When you hear phrases like all lives matter, right? Why would anybody ever say all lives matter? Well, because the phrase Black Lives Matter produces dissonance in them about what they're ignoring in their life. So in order to protect themselves from that dissonance, I'd like to say they turn the dissonance into virtue and say, well, no, all lives matter. Now that's clearly indicates my Wanda bubble is stable. I don't have to empathize with your suffering. And not only that, but I'm virtuous for doing it.
we all engage in denial. We all have things we don't want to admit to ourselves, things we don't want to think about, things we suppress, not repress. That's a different issue related, but the suppressed thoughts are the ones it's like you don't want to let yourself think about. And yeah, these defense mechanisms can certainly go together. And she's got plenty of suppression. There are things, especially later on, the part where these things don't come up, that's when I guess it does seem more like denial. But later on, when it does come up, when she's even willing to ask Pietro, why are you different? Where she let herself have moments when she thinks about these things, because that also comes out of other characters challenging her, where Agnes and somehow through fake Pietro, but he's really, well, of course he's Peter in the other universe. We don't know if he's don't know what he is yet. We got one episode left. How long can this episode be to answer all these questions and have the fight scenes it's supposed to have? I think some of those fight scenes won't be resolved in the typical MCU, third act gigantic fights. Otherwise, that's the whole episode. And and we want some connection to the X-Men movie through this guy. Of course, the actor is. We all have times when we have things we don't want to admit to ourselves. Like, no, these pants haven't gotten tight. Whatever it is that we don't want to admit. But when you have reality-altering powers, well, is it psychotic when reality legitimately gets changed? The Avengers themselves in Endgame, when they change the world, they're not just accepting the way things are. They've been in a depressed state for a while. We see that early on. My wife finally watched Endgame last night. Well, actually, we watched the last hour first because she wanted to see Thanos get kicked around. She wanted to see Wanda and Captain Marvel clobber him. she knew about that from dialogue in WandaVision, and she wanted to see him die. And then it's like, well, she wanted to see more, but she didn't want to see the depressing earliest part. So we start with Ant-Man coming out of the van, and then she watches the rest of it. And the whole thing repeatedly is not accepting the bad fate. And we see a bunch of superheroes who've been kind of resigned to the fact that they lost to Thanos. And they are in depressed states, like is shown by this little things on every single one of them, and then big things on others, like the giant skull tattoos and stuff on Hawkeye's arm, which they don't actually show that much because the artist would have to deal with that every single time they show his arm. Why do we find this particular show fascinating? Why is it the most popular show in the world now, when it's all about grief?
I love,
Go ahead,
they do such a great job. I think we all are experiencing a lot of grief right now. Like COVID really messed up our Wanda bubbles. And
Truly.
I think a lot of us are going back and watching all those old like television shows of our yesteryear, the Full Houses and the Friends and the, possibly further back, just depending on what was your sweet spot nostalgically. And so I feel like in some ways it's a nice parallel in a superheroed up iteration of, like feeling our own griefs and our own loss and our wish that we could make self-design a world where we can have everything that we want back again, mixed with that nostalgia element that's really popular right now. I feel like that's, in some ways, it's all coming together to hit some kind of really nice sweet spot that's allowing us to grieve with her in a really safe and protected kind of way. Like imagine if you lost somebody to COVID right now and you could just wish them back and you could just wish your life back to what it was. Yeah.
Now, Aaron, you're not on the list of those of us who are going to be doing the Wizard World post finale analysis on. So Scott is so for you, Aaron, in particular, what do you think we need to talk about? Of course, we won't know till the finale, but what are some things that we really need to talk about with WandaVision?
Oh gosh, one of the things that came up on Facebook, the psychic therapists kind of thing, is this idea of Agnes as therapist. And it's really, I had all a bunch of this stuff about unconscious bias that I want to talk about, and then that just melted my brain. This idea of, as a former therapist myself, imagine walking somebody through chronic, pervasive, repeated traumas over and over and over again over the course of a half hour, and helping that person to come out to the other end. And we were kind of having the conversation of whether Agnes is a really good therapist or a really evil therapist. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
That made me think of something. Catherine Hahn, who's doing such a wonderful job playing every version of Agnes. She got her big break with a role that was specifically created for her after a showrunner met her. I think it was Crossing Jordan, where she played a therapist. I think that was the series. But this role was created for her. And it just, you talking about that makes me think, is that part of why they thought of Catherine Hahn for this role? I mean, she's good at so many things. I actually wasn't that aware of her before. I'd seen her in things, but hadn't realized it. She's great with the comedy, but she also has the variety of other things she can do. And so, yeah, it is. Of course, by the time we analyze the finale, we'll find out, was Agnes or Agatha a good therapist or not? Because what we saw in this last episode, well, we still don't know, is she good or evil? And it's like, why can't she be more complicated than that? And I think that's also the strength of the weekly format. We get to take a little more time with the villains too.
Even her origin story is kind of ambivalent. On the one hand, she's being destroyed by the coven because she broke the rules. Different peoples are going to have different reactions to what that means. And then she ends up killing them all. For some people, that's going to be a power moment, and for others, it's going to be a villain moment. And I just really like the way that the writers are not letting any of this collapse into a binary. And for me,
even matricide, even killing your mom. It's
yeah,
she didn't mean
I hope
to,
it doesn't
and mom
make me
attacked
look evil.
first.
Yeah.
If I say that was an ambivalent situation, but I think they're working real hard to keep things, I don't want to say ambiguous, but I want to say non-binary. And I don't think we're going to get the kind of Campbellian ending that we're used to pre-MCU. I think we're seeing a different type of what's traditionally called hero narrative emerge, and it has more to do with dealing with the world as it is in terms of who you've been.
Well, Aaron thought about Agatha as therapist gets me to reflecting on the things she has done along the way and the reason she has done them. She says outright that she's been trying to nudge Wanda here and there into confronting reality, and it's like having fake Pietro show up after other little things she'd been doing along the way to make Wanda think about the nature of what's going on. And most therapists don't do them in those ways, but it's a different kind of circumstance. And she doesn't have time for the patients either. As she knows, it's like there are people who are like that one yo magic, go magic, whatever ad. So you look at this, okay, it's like it's the claymation thing, true to certain types of ads from the 90s, which the episode was doing a 90s sitcom, but then it's really creepy when the character starves to death. But that's the same one where we find out later on there are characters that are barely moving. But it's like, yeah, these people, their lives are in danger, aren't they? And Wanda doesn't even, and Vision has witnessed that, but he hasn't had a chance to get back yet.
Well, let's go to that idea of whether or not what Agnes's prodding is. I mean, so I'm not a therapist, okay? So I'm going to say that up front.
So we get to look a little more objectively at those therapists.
There you go. I've never hypnotized anyone, but I do
Most
suspect
don't.
that
I'm sorry.
when people are under hypnosis, there is prodding into certain memory spaces, right? And part of that reasoning, I would argue, is to eventually work to try to overcome this impossibility of completion, right? To theoretically get some content out and try to create a new integrated self. And that does, I'm not going to say requires, because I don't do it, but I suspect those who do engage in the kind of prodding that Agnes was, but maybe not with the same wicked intentions of ultimately stealing someone's powers.
But is that her intention? We still don't know her intention. Is it to get Wanda's power, which was certainly possible? Was it just curiosity about this gigantic magical explosion she sensed? Which honestly, more magic beings should be showing up soon, if considering that. Yeah. Or is it that now that she knows about it, she wants to fix it, and she's wary of saying that way to Wanda, because we know Wanda is totally capable of getting mad, which can be good and important. Although Agnes seems to be steering her away from mad. Like when she's getting mad at Monica, and Agnes is okay with her being mad at Monica, but she also steers her way back into a little bit more of, I can guide this depressed gal back inside. She seems to find that more useful to work with than getting Wanda mad, I think.
Well, it's interesting that she's got that extra bit of knowledge about the Scarlet Witch. Like, you are the Scarlet brain melt moment. You're the Scarlet Witch. And so I do wonder, and then she almost with a sense of fear talked about, like, you're pure chaos energy. And, how do you not know about all these, like, ways that we harness it and direct it and things like that? And going back to that idea of Agnes as therapist, of, how we do, work with emotion, and how we do help clients to walk towards it when it's helpful, and then maybe walk back from it when it's destructive, with the hope of ultimately the client learning how to do that themselves. But yeah, I think I was very intrigued by the very end when she's that how she handled that phrase, "You're the Scarlet Witch," and then those following sentences.
Well, our more creative side is less rational.
Yep.
And chaos can be a power. There is an association between creativity and psychosis, not quite as much as Hans Eysenck had thought, but there is a connection. They're not letting the rational part of the brain hold themselves back on some things and come up with some stuff the rest of us wouldn't think about, because that doesn't make any sense. And it might be a way to say, yes, you're suffering grief, or yes, you have this chaos in your head. You don't have to think of it as who you are as a person, but it is still something you have to figure out how to deal with. And maybe you need help, and maybe you need help realizing you need help. But it can be, we'll also see where they wind up. It can be a useful way of looking at mental illness, or things that people think of as mental illness or label it that, as a way to say, it's like you can still be, you don't have to be the villain. You don't have to think of yourself that way while you're trying to figure out how to deal with this chaos in your life.
Yeah,
Totally.
It doesn't have to be stigmatized, but it does need to be managed.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And why would we stigmatize it? Because it violates rational narratives about what we should be. And we're driving ourselves crazy as a culture, pretending to be rational systems.
It's like, even though in any given year, 1 out of 5 people qualify for a mental illness.
Yeah.
And so that's in any given year. So actually, over the course of lifetime, it's a larger number than that. And this is those who fully qualify for psychiatric criteria. But it's not an either or, despite the fact that the manual is designed to make it sound like you either have malaria or not. You either and they know that when they were revising the DSM-5 to revise the categories, they knew some of these things needed to be changed to recognize there's a dimension, especially those personality disorders, but they could not figure out how to change the system of personality disorders based on science. And they knew it needed change, but they ended up saying, okay, we're just going to go with exactly the same system we had in DSM-4, even though we know it's not this simple. If you either qualify for this condition or you don't. And this is kind of going back to the old Freudian types of ideas that people tried real hard to move away from the DSM-3 on, to be a more medical model. And there are plenty of good reasons for going more medical than Freud. But his view of us all as neurotic, but by degrees, has its uses.
When you look at the better brain science being done these days, it's not being done by thinking of the brain as a computer. It's being done by thinking of the brain as an ecosystem, a nonlinear, highly chaotic ecosystem, that any order that exists in it emerges out of the order of the system itself. So the idea,
that sounds like Westview.
There you go. And I love it when Agnes asks Wanda, "How'd you do it?" And Wanda says, "I didn't do anything." The conscious phenomenon we call Wanda doesn't have to do anything, because the system is set up to organize itself in the face of unbearable input. Come to respect ourselves to the extent we respect letting others live in their Wanda bubble, instead of using our conscious binary. Oh, you must be the villain, right? Oh, you must be the hero.
Well, we have these tendencies to force ourselves into these categories. I mean, it's an important skill early in life when we learn to categorize things. You're this or you're that, and you have to develop that categorization skill, and then later on learn that but we're all more complicated than that. Even gender, which is used as one of the most basic binary things for kids to learn early in life, later on, if you've got greater emotional or cognitive complexity, you're going to recognize, okay, there's all kinds of evidence about it being more complicated than that.
So imagine if we raised our kids with that narrative from day one.
But on that binary thing, because I think that's really important on this villain hero issue. We've got somebody who we've seen in the flashback episode, once upon a time, She heard, because they forgot to turn off the speaker, she heard them say all the volunteers had died, and she went into it anyway. So this makes a statement about where she has been for a long time. So we say she's had hope. It's like, why did she join the freedom-hating terrorist organization? Because we wanted to change the world. So even as in a dark place that she's been for so much of her growing up, so much of her life, ever since that happy family life, while battle was going on outside and they're just watching TV, so they were acclimated to battle in their lives, and there are people in the world who live in places like that, where they are acclimated to the fact that war is going on around them. There are people in parts of Bosnia who've never really known peace, and other places in the world. And here she is now saying, maybe I am the villain. That says something about how she's thinking of herself. And there's so many people who they have the point, if they've suffered severe depression and other things, but it's a number of depressed people that get this point of just thinking of themselves as bad, or maybe I'm just bad. And while it's a childlike thing too, it is also something that adults will engage in. But I hope I know there are fans who are speculating, oh, maybe she'll emerge as a real villain from this. As we know, she's going to appear in the next Doctor Strange movie. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. And that word madness in the title is interesting. Yeah. Is it Wanda's madness going on in that multiverse? I hope not, because I think that's less human place to take this story. I hope it's that she's studying these things and trying to actually learn, some of these things that Agatha is amazed that she doesn't know. Where do y'all hope WandaVision goes?
I'll tell you where I hope it doesn't go, and it's exactly where you just said. If they end up turning her into a villain, this will be probably more disappointing than the last season of Game of Thrones, right? In other words, to take a female character and then to actually expose her powerfully, to expose her with power, and then to say, oh, and she became evil. I don't think Disney would ever be forgiven. And I want White Vision to tell a story about what it means to be a complex system, and not talk about people in binaries, and not build Wanda bubbles that keep people out because of binary reasons.
You want the computer character to be the one who's helping people not see things as zeros or ones?
Yes, well said. Exactly. Pinocchio, right?
Aaron, where do you hope we're going with this story?
Thinking, because I've spent the last couple minutes thinking as a therapist again, I really do, from an emotional perspective, hope that this does culminate in acceptance on some level. Like, I really do hope that she, through going through exposure to her old traumas, being forced, and now she's, you've got Agatha kind of dangling her kids in front of her as a reason to pull it together. I really do hope that for her, and I do hope that we can see somebody come out the other end stronger. I don't know if that would make for good television or good plot lines.
I think it would.
From a, taking off the white hat for the moment and putting on the black hat and going it back into the binary for a minute, part of me wants a nice little romp between Agatha and Wanda, like kind of like Thelma, just like a team up. Thelma and Louise, that's the words I'm going for.
Yeah.
That would be, and again, that has nothing to do with the larger Marvel Cinescape, except for the fact that might be an interesting foil for the eventual Doctor Strange, I guess. But so I don't know if that's going to be gratifying. It goes against the whole let's not have Daenerys part 2, but
Well, in the comics, they've been so true to so many elements of her complicated comic book history. In the comics, Agatha's role with Wanda has usually been as mentor. It's been a fascinating ride, a TV show doing some things that nobody will ever do again either. They came up with a format.
Yep.
There are other things you can do with characters in fantasy lands and or whatever, but nobody's ever done this particular show before, and nobody will again.
Nope.
And we want to see a whole lot more of her adventures, and we want to see, okay, what kind of conversation does she have with Monica? We want Jimmy Woo to go off and solve mysteries, maybe with Darcy on the team. And there's so many stories that can grow out of this because they've given us wonderful characters, and they fleshed out some. Even Jimmy Woo, just as simple as doing the magic trick with the card that he wanted Scott to teach him back in Ant-Man and the Wasp. That right there is showing some growth that you think, okay, he probably did not get dusted because he wanted to learn the trick. He did not learn that trick in 2 weeks, so he probably did not get dusted. He'd learned the magic trick in the course of those 5 years. I've loved this show. I've loved it for many reasons. Well, I love the fact that people are saying, "Oh, you should do a WandaVision psychology book." There's not going to be a second season, and by the time the book came out, this will not be the same hot topic it was. That's why we've got to talk about this in these videos more than we've done with any other particular topic. Oh, any last thought, especially Aaron, who won't be joining us for the Wizard World session? Last thoughts?
More Wanda.
More Wanda.
I want more Wanda. So maybe we write a Wanda book. No, that's all. I'm loving WandaVision. I think this is great. I'm sad I can't make it on Saturday, but love getting a chance to talk about it, and especially, seeing her progression through that and getting to have a little nostalgia myself, growing up watching Nick at Night and things like that. And the Mary Tyler or the Dick Van Dyke Show was always one of my favorites, and so it was kind of fun to be able to point at, oh, that's Malcolm in the Middle. Oh, that's Dick Van Dyke and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, more Wanda.
But it's not really ending because it's leading to other things, and I think it's going to be one incredibly rewatchable show too. Well, thank you both, Scott, Aaron. Where can folks find you online?
You can find me on Twitter at @mypsychgeek.
You can find me on Twitter at @dark_loops, and you can find me on YouTube at a channel called Dark Loops Productions.
I am at Superheroologist on Twitter. I'm easy to find. All right. Well, thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much, Travis.